Hello and welcome to the France 24 debate, a special edition from here in Istanbul, a remarkable city on both the European and the Asian continents, the dividing line, the Bosphorus Strait behind me. Today we ask, what direction is Turkey going in? Recep Tayyip Erdogan claiming victory after picking up 52% in the country's first ever presidential runoff, winning a third term, extending his 20 years in power. It was meant to be his biggest ever political challenge, and yet he emerged boastful and emboldened. He won round one, defying the polls, and in round two, his margin of victory was only slightly smaller. Erdogan, an experienced autocrat, beat an unseasoned Democrat in Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. Now that unprecedentedly broad opposition alliance has to do some soul searching. Tonight in the France 24 debate, we ask, what direction is Turkey's democracy headed in? We take stock of the economy and we look at the country's growing international role. Delano D'Souza has more.
Istanbul bustles with life as the city's residents digest the results of Sunday's election. President Erdogan won another mandate, securing his grip on the future of Turkish politics, an outcome that has the city divided.
I was expecting Tayyip Erdogan to win. At least we know him, we have experience with him. I know that some others wanted a different outcome, but it's the decision of the people, and we need to respect it.
I have no more hope for Turkey. I want to go overseas as soon as possible. I'm an engineering student. I'll be better elsewhere.
Erdogan supporters flooded the streets of Istanbul once news broke of his re-election victory. Over in the capital, Ankara, crowds gathered at the presidential palace as the newly re-elected president issued a call for unity.
No one has lost today. All 85 million won. We are not offended, resentful, angry or enraged with anyone. It is now time to put aside all the debates and conflicts regarding the election.
Turkey's opposition has called on its supporters not to give up hope. But according to analysts, the country's opposition is in a weakened position.
It's certain that the CHP will show signs of being crackled soon from within. There will be soul searching. Overall, the opposition, as I said, is ended up in a weaker position, unable to have any influence in the work of the parliament.
As Recep Tayyip Erdogan secures another term in office, his most pressing challenge is to fix the Turkish economy, as the currency continues to lose its value and the rate of inflation hovers at over 40%.
Well, Dr. Ravza Kavakji joins me here now. Welcome and congratulations on the victory. You're a former AK lawmaker for Istanbul. Erdogan said the entire nation of 85 million people won, but the fact is that the country remains very divided.
I don't agree. First, I would like to start out by saying thank you to all the people who went out to vote. This is very important. We celebrate democracy in Turkey. And also, I should thank the tens of thousands of AK Party volunteers who worked day and night to deliver this historic win. And also to the hundreds of volunteers from the opposition who worked very hard and they fought a worthy cause.
A different tone from Erdogan on his victory speech, though. He seemed to taunt the opposition on stage, saying bye-bye Kemal repeatedly.
That is something that was said during the election campaign as well, but it was a message of unity, and people of Turkey voted in President Erdogan for another 5 years because they were happy with the services and the services that AK Party brought. And we're thankful to all the voters.
A message of unity, but there are questions about the jailed Kurdish leader. Erdogan also took aim at the LGBT community during that victory speech.
Jailed Kurdish leader is not a good terminology to use. In Turkey, nobody is immune to, nobody has the immunity from crime. If someone commits a crime, depending on whatever they do, then they will have to serve. But of course, after a due judicial process. So I definitely do not agree. And of course, we know that in Turkey, everyone has their own, are free to live their own lives in their private lives. But just like any other society, we also have conservative elements and liberal elements. But we're proud of our secular state and democratic state. So nobody can interfere in anybody's else's life.
Let's speak about those conservative elements. After round one, we saw both Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu talking about what they would do with Syrian refugees in the country, up to 4 million who live here. We heard Erdogan announce last night that Turkey was talking to Qatar about negotiating repatriating 1 million Syrian refugees. Where do things stand on that front?
You know that Turkey took a very good stand, humanitarian stand, opening its doors to people who fled for their lives. And talking about the way people were speaking, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, who was presented to be Gandhi and who was promising peace to everybody, all of a sudden, overnight, turned into the goblin he actually is. And all of a sudden, he started saying that he wants to send 10 million...
Calling the opposition leader a goblin might not be that message of unity Erdogan was preaching.
But that's what Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu was saying. That's not what I am saying. He was promising opening the gates of heaven, and over one night after the first round, he decided that if refugees do not go, the doors of hell will open. That is the kind of unfortunate message that we heard from the opposition during the election campaigning, and it was a message of hate. It was a message of disparity.
Where are the negotiations with Qatar and repatriating those 1 million?
It is, of course, there's no 10 million refugees in Turkey, first of all. That's Kılıçdaroğlu's numbers, not our numbers. Obviously, he's planning on sending more people who are Turkish citizens and not Syrians or aren't coming from anywhere else. So those aren't my numbers. I have to state that officially. But what we have done is, as President Erdogan announced, those people who want to go back home...
The voluntary repatriation.
The voluntary repatriation. Already 500,000 people have left and went back to Syria and are living peacefully. But if there is more people who want to go back, then that will more construction. There needs to be more construction. But these, yes, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Well, here, let's look forward. In July, there's a NATO summit that's going to be closely watched around the world. Turkey has blocked Sweden's application to join, despite other members of that military alliance wanting them to join. Will Turkey change its position on that soon?
Well, that depends on Sweden, whether they change their position on supporting terrorism or allowing terrorist organizations to make propaganda. Look, Will, this is very important for an international audience to understand. Allowing or accommodating PKK, PYD, YPG, which are internationally recognized terrorist organizations, to do their propaganda is no different than allowing ISIS, Daesh, to do propaganda.
I think the concern is that Sweden might not be aware of who these people are that they'd be sending back to Turkey and what fate awaits them.
We didn't talk about sending anybody back. We're talking about allowing Daesh propaganda, ISIS propaganda, PKK propaganda in one of the cities in Europe. Imagine in France, would anyone be allowed to promote Daesh, ISIS, or Taliban, or any other terrorist organization? PKK is no different. They have caused the death of lives of 40,000 innocent civilians in this country. So if you promote it, if you allow them, I'm sorry, we can't have that in NATO. Turkey is one of the founding members, you know, Will, and Turkey is protecting the borders of NATO. So this is very important, and I hope that our Swedish colleagues come to the realization we shouldn't have any promotion of international terrorist organizations in NATO.
Let's discuss the economy. In the run-up to the election, this was the biggest issue, the cost of living crisis. Erdogan's been criticized around the world for his decision to keep interest rates low in the face of rampant inflation. Is that unorthodox policy going to continue?
Look, when we look at the main issues that Turkish people are concerned about when we were out on the ground, and that's still the three issues, one of them is the economy, like you mentioned. One of them is rebuilding the earthquake region. 13 million people were affected, rebuilding their homes. And the third is making sure that there is stability and security in the region. And people know that Erdogan can deliver because he has a very good track for doing that. When we come to the economy, since last October, the inflation went down by 42%. We have done it before, and
the official rate went down 42%, but many think the real figure might be twice as high.
Well, many people think many things, many people say many things. But when we look at the reality on the ground, these are the figures we have. And 2 million jobs have been created. Yes. Thank you so much, during this time. So it's very important for people to understand that this is the will of the Turkish nation, and they trust President Erdogan, who is saying that he will deliver by the end of next year the inflation to a single digit.
One final thought before we leave you. The opposition said this was the most unjust election in years. I'd like to get your response.
We heard that from the opposition. We heard that in the international media. That is not true. That's definitely nonsense. When we talk about the media coverage, we talk about Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu and everyone that was united together with him against Erdogan. We saw that they had enough coverage, they had their own media outlets, and they were able to campaign freely. I saw them campaign. Sometimes we would run into each other with members of the opposition. All the volunteers,
very
limited
worked very hard. TV coverage for Kılıçdaroğlu.
Definitely not. That's nonsense, because the state television gave exact same coverage. We didn't see President Erdogan or any invitation for anyone from
We saw 48 hours
party.
for Erdogan compared to 32 minutes for Kılıçdaroğlu.
Yes, that's exactly the same words we hear from the opposition and the international media. That's not true. Naturally, I do have to clarify that President Erdogan continued to serve as the president, and when there were international engagements, naturally it wasn't a campaign, but he would give information to the public about bilateral meetings or anything else he did as the president. But as far as campaigning was concerned, I don't think President Erdogan got enough coverage in the opposing media. We had no invitations.
All right, well, Revza, we have to leave it there. Revza Kavakji speaking to us. Let's listen into that opposition leader, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, saying that the state had mobilized all its means against him in this election. Take a listen.
We experienced the most unfair election in recent years. All the means of the state were mobilized for a political party. All possibilities were laid under one man's feet.
Well, we could speak to our correspondent, Jasper Mortimer, in Ankara. Hello to you, Jasper. Earlier, you were at a press conference. Tell us a little bit about what you heard there.
Yes, the OSCE and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe gave their views of the election. And their basic criticism was that it was an unlevel playing field. And they said it wasn't just a matter of more airtime being given to Erdogan's campaign, but the fact that also the media didn't provide equal opportunities to the two candidates, so that, you know, if the one candidate criticized the other, the media didn't ask for the other candidate's response. They also criticized Erdogan for using public resources for campaigning and said, you know, that he shouldn't have inaugurated new public facilities. For instance, he inaugurated a mini aircraft carrier and have used that inauguration ceremony as part of his campaign. A second criticism was that the environment didn't provide the conditions for holding democratic elections. Frank Schwaber of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe said Turkey must the European Court of Human Rights rulings and release from prison Selahattin Demirtas and Osman Kavala, which the Court of Human Rights have said have been unjustly imprisoned. Now, Selahattin Demirtas is a very significant Kurdish politician. In the 2014 election, presidential election, he got 10% of the vote. Schwaber said that the election was a bit like a soccer match in which the one side plays with football boots and the other side has no boots. A third criticism was it criticized the inflammatory and discriminatory language used by both sides. Quote, mutual accusations of collaboration with terrorist organizations. And I think what it was referring to there was President Erdogan's frequent charge that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu was allied with the PKK. In return, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu accused Erdogan of negotiating secretly with Apo Öcalan, the PKK leader who was imprisoned on İmralı Island.
Yeah, and Jasper, markets reacting after Turkey's first ever presidential runoff. Tell us a bit more on that.
Yes, today the lira fell to 20.1 against the dollar. There was a fall of 0.58. And that was its biggest drop since early November. Reuters quoted one analyst as saying an Erdogan win offers no comfort for any foreign investor. However, the stock market firmed. The benchmark BIST 100 index rose 4.1%, and that showed that traders are relieved that the electoral uncertainty is now over. In his victory speeches last night, President Erdogan said he would soon appoint a new economic team that would have international credibility and would tackle the cost of living and high inflation. He's expected to announce his new cabinet on Friday. And when he talked about international credibility, I saw that as a hint that he would not be reappointing the current finance minister, Nuruddin Nebati, who is a political scientist.
All right, Jasper, thank you very much. Jasper Mortimer reporting from Ankara. Also joining us here now is Bahadir Kalyan Azad. Thank you for coming in. We're going to discuss the lira in a moment. We also want to discuss inflation, the official figure at 43%. Some think the real one is much higher. Here's President Erdogan speaking earlier.
Solving the problems caused by the price increases as a result of inflation and compensating for welfare losses is the most urgent issue of the process ahead. It's not difficult for us to find a solution to these issues. Confidence and stability are the most important things, and we'll continue with these principles. We'll build a strong economy around these rules.
The economy, the cost of living crisis, the inflation, that was the major issue in the run-up to this vote. It seems that maybe culture wars or identity politics trumped it. Is that your read of it?
Well, this is obviously the deciding element. There are lots of pieces in the picture. Social issues, immigration, security, international relations, economy. But, well, you know, when there is a result, there are several people voting for a candidate for different reasons. At the end of the day, yes, there are lots of votes who wanted to favor the candidate of the opposition, because of the economic problems, and there are some votes who didn't care about them, and they just thought that there are more priority issues.
Yeah, since 2018, Turkey's limped from one currency crisis to another. The lira has lost 77% of its value against the dollar over the past 5 years. Either the interest rate has to give, or the exchange rate. I mean, that's what international economists would agree, right?
Absolutely. This is the rational way of thinking about the economy, and Turkey will need to adopt a very formal, very rational, very credible interest rate policy in the weeks ahead. So it is unavoidable. But this is not all, of course. So we are now a little bit beyond that first moments of tactical maneuvers with economic policy tools. There are more fundamental problems which have to be dealt simultaneously. There should be, first of all, credible people on the commands of the economy. We will need
credible people. There was talks that maybe Mehmet Şimşek would return, the former deputy prime minister, but he doesn't want to come back into politics.
Well, I don't know behind the scenes, but he is definitely a credible person. And then there will be lots of other issues linked with launching structural reforms, for instance, because the last years in the Turkish economy are also a demonstration of the correlation between the rule of law issues on the one hand and the economic performance on the other hand.
Can you explain that link?
Well, the market's perception for the foreseeability of the Turkish market, for the predictability of the Turkish rule of law issues, regulations in relation with both the economy, but also with the justice's independence and impartiality, with democratic issues. They are all now together in the way a country figures in the international global atlas of power.
And bringing in foreign investment, which is a major part of the Turkish economy.
Yes, because Turkey's current account deficit points out to the importance of the foreign direct investment in Turkey. I'm not talking about hot money, but just the real greenfield investments or good mergers and acquisitions, investing in technology, in jobs, which are very important. So Turkey will need to go back to the track of good economic performance. Let's do not forget that Turkey, until very recently, was a country in compliant with the Maastricht criteria. Budget deficit, public debt, they were all among the better facts in all Europe. So Turkey can do it.
Well, let's remind our viewers who might not be familiar. Erdogan, back early on in his rule, he was respected internationally as a reformer. Turkey had great economic growth under him. Now, the thing that makes the headlines are criticisms of his policies. Why did he make this transition?
Well, it's early because we have to take a distance with the history. But he will be in his last term now, officially. So it's time for him to think about his legacy. And as you said, to regenerate his early years' economic credibility, economic performance, economic success. It's possible. There are ways to do it. There is room for innovation as well, not only our orthodox economic policies, but Turkey can invest more, let's say, in artificial intelligence. Turkey can invest more in space technologies. Turkey can invest more in agriculture, in education. These are all structural reforms that Turkey needs. And they are not necessarily, of course, producing positive effects immediately, but by way of launching the process and trying to embrace the society, trying to look for majorities or support beyond the 50% is very important, because the other 50% which did not vote for the actual government is also in qualitative terms very important for Turkey's success in terms of their contribution to economy, to growth, to education. They are younger, so they are important as well.
Speaking about growth and these orthodox policies, if Erdogan does return to them and he raises interest rates, does that risk an economic recession?
Well, this is why it is not alone an important instrument. interest rates can be higher, but the trust, the confidence should be injected to the markets that once they are higher, they will be gradually reduced, so that it's about expectations. It's about managing the expectations and certainty to the detriment of uncertainty. So it requires skills.
Another question. The government estimated that the rebuilding cost after the earthquake disasters was $103 billion. Much of that money will come from abroad, but some of it will have to be financed by Turkey. Where will it come up with those funds?
Well, that will be for a while also a reason for the ongoing inflation. So we cannot expect the inflation to go down immediately for several reasons, and this is one of them. But another important factor will be Turkey's relation with the European Union, its most important economic partner in terms of trade, investments, tourism, technological partnerships. So if Turkey is able, meanwhile, to recover its relations with the European Union, and President Macron's European Political Community meeting, which will take place in a few days in Moldova, is a good example of an anchor for Turkey as the European Union integration process. And then the customs union, for instance, that Turkey has with the European Union has become an anachronism. It was concluded in the 90s. So Turkey and European Union has common interest in re-energizing as well modernizing this customs union with digital dimension, with green transition policies. So it is both in the interest of the European Union and Turkey to work together in these years ahead. This is also what, for example, European business community says. The Confederation of European Business, where TÜSİAD and TİSK from Turkey are members, and MEDEF from France, BDI from Germany. So all the voice of the European business in its last report on Europe's geostrategic autonomy policies for economic competitiveness at the global level indicated this customs union's modernization as one of the important instruments for the sake of Europe's future. So there are some ways to go to a positive future.
Yes, in some ways. Bahadir, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Bahadir Kalyan, as president of the Franco-Turkish think tank, the Bosphorus Institute. And speaking about relations with Turkey, a number of world leaders were quick to congratulate Erdogan on his victory. None other than Russia's Vladimir Putin being the first to do so. Turkey's influence increasing with its role in the war in Ukraine. Fraser Jackson has more.
President Erdogan's re-election has a wider impact outside of Turkey's borders. After news of his win broke, international leaders were quick to send their congratulations to the man holding several important cards in his hand. Erdogan has proved himself to be an important player in the war in Ukraine, walking a tightrope between Kyiv, NATO and the Kremlin. Congratulations came from all around. US President Joe Biden said, "I look forward to continuing to work together as NATO allies on bilateral issues and shared global challenges." Turkey has upset the NATO apple cart over the last 6 months by singularly blocking Sweden's NATO membership bid. Little surprise then that the Prime Minister's office tried to earn some goodwill with a message too. Cooperation was also on the mind of Ursula von der Leyen. The EU's relationship with Ankara has been instrumental in stemming a flow of migrants from the Middle East and beyond in recent years. The bloc's Commission President said, "I look forward to continue building the EU-Turkey relationship. It is of strategic importance for both the EU and Turkey to work on advancing this relationship for the benefit of our people." But the most pressing issue is the ongoing war in Ukraine. Erdogan has used his proximity to Vladimir Putin to broker a deal to export stockpiled grain from blockaded Ukrainian ports. President Zelensky said, "We count on the further strengthening of the strategic partnership for the benefit of our countries, as well as the strengthening of cooperation for the security and stability of Europe." Striking a different tone, Russian President Vladimir Putin called Erdogan a dear friend, adding that his victory was clear evidence of the Turkish people's support for your efforts to strengthen state sovereignty and pursue an independent foreign policy. And it wasn't just regional players sending their regards to President Erdogan. Congratulations also came in from the UN, Brazil, Qatar, Egypt, and more.
Well, here to break down the election results for us is Ayesha Gulsert, an independent journalist. Welcome and thank you for joining us here.
Thank you for the invitation.
A lot to say about this election. On one hand, it was a first ever presidential runoff, so an impressive showing for the opposition to take Erdogan this far. At the same time, Erdogan is predicted to lose. What do you make of that?
It shows once again that you never know in Turkey how the politics are going to go.
Yeah, the lesson, don't trust the polls anywhere.
Well, don't trust the weather anywhere and don't trust the polls anywhere. That's the first thing. Second of all, it also shows that 20 years is a long time. It can go, there's always a fatigue, a tiredness of can the same party or the same leader continue to ride the high horse in a way, and that's been what Erdogan has thought he will be doing. I think these elections have been actually pretty interesting, kind of like a thriller, because some people didn't even think there would be a second round, that it would be wrapped up on the first round. It was actually done, and then they said, well, you know, you never know which way it's going to tip or toe. But you did see Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who was more confident and it was as if oxygen was going again, to his chest, and he was breathing again after the 14th of May. So I think that the opposition did lead, despite all the criticism that people can give. They did give a great combat. Let's not forget that for the past 20 years, it's been the same regime.
Undefeated in national elections.
Absolutely. So already on the 14th of May, to say that there will be a second round was a shock, I'm sure, for the AKP and also for the supporters of Erdogan.
Yeah, but it's also difficult, I think, for some of our viewers to understand that in a country with free elections, that one man could now be entering his third term in power despite a cost of living crisis, despite those February earthquakes, despite anger towards corruption and the political elite, that this man and his party have won 7 straight national elections.
William, you used a key word, free. Were these elections really free and fair? I wouldn't put my bet on it. In the sense of, I did see your first guest who passed saying that it was absolutely a free and open campaign. It was not. On state TV, and if they wish, they can bring on the numbers. The numbers of hours that the opposition, that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu and his supporters had, and that Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his supporters are on state TV was not the same amount. That's the first thing. The numbers you gave were right. The second thing is that how fair can it be when 90% of the media in this country belongs actually to people who are the close entourage of this regime? So that means that what you hear on the radio, what you see on TV, what you read in the news is actually not an objective, not a fair, but a 90% biased news.
Can you elaborate on that, Ayesha? You're an independent journalist. What's it like to do your job here in Turkey?
For instance, I am no longer able to work for the Turkish media. It's in the past years, in the sense that before the Erdogan era, before the 2000s, this is how it used to go. A bank owner used to own also a newspaper, who used to also own, a big business. So you could not write in your newspaper anything about corruption in the bank or in the business. The thing is that afterwards there were words like Armenian, Kurdish, Kurdish rights, Alevi. Those were words that in the late 90s and even mid 90s you could not publish in the Turkish media at all either. So censorship is unfortunately a part of the Turkish media spectrum in the past almost 100 years. But what has changed in the 10 past years is that there's no more dissident voices that you can watch on TV. It's almost like you don't need any editor-in-chiefs, because the call in terms of who's going to be what you can talk about comes from the saray, which means from the palace in Ankara.
Talk to us a little bit about the vote, the youth vote. Since the last election, over 5 million Turks became of voting age. Any indication how many voted and how they might have voted?
It was very interesting. Coming to Istanbul, I was somewhere in Europe. And a couple of days ago, I was coming with the plane, and at the airport, I was surrounded by this colony of Turkish high school students who cannot vote and who I'm sure would have given everything they could to be able to vote. And when I asked them, okay, you're 15, 16 years old, but if only you were 18, who would you have voted for? And they all said in a voice, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu.
And were these urban youth or were they from the rural areas?
They were from a city in Istanbul that is about an hour and a half drive. But the second thing that I asked them was, what will you do once you have your high school diploma? And all of them, unfortunately, wanted to leave. The thing is that we are not only having an exodus of the intelligentsia in Turkey, but also of the journalists in Turkey. But Turkey is becoming, I know we hear a lot of, you were talking about markets, stock markets, but we hear also a lot of this cultural, vibrant, youthful generation that we are losing. And once a country of 85 million loses not only hope, but also its youth, I don't know what it will be left with. Yeah. Maybe oldies like us.
Yeah, 85 million, important to remember. This is the most populous country on the European continent. You mentioned that many of the youth want to go abroad. I'd like to speak about the abroad vote. 1.7 million votes cast overseas from the Anadolu agency, the state agency. It said 60% of those went to Erdogan. Why is it that so many Turkish expats living abroad support the president?
The question that we ask a lot is, why is it that if life is so wonderful overseas, why don't you come here to Turkey and live instead of voting from miles away for the regime that's going to be here? That's one. Two, let's not forget, a lot of the Germans, Dutch, French, Turks who went into these countries were actually, they came from Anatolia in order to be the quote-unquote cheap labor of Europe. So they do have this bond with the land, with the mid-Turkey in a way, with Anatolia, and they are thirsty to come back. And what they see in Erdoğan is this incarnation of the Turkishness, of this identity they kind of lost. And also, let's be fair, 60 to 65% of Turks in overseas, they did vote for Erdoğan or for AKP, but also this country, inside the local elections, is 60 to 65% already right, traditional.
The largest voting bloc in Turkey, so at a certain point the math is just stacked against opposition that the country is going to be this polarized. I want to ask you about Erdogan and the party. A lot of questions about whether voters would be willing to split the ticket because they knew that AK would win the parliamentary election, so maybe they might as well vote for Erdogan anyway. But is Erdogan more popular than AK? If it wasn't him in charge of the party, do you think the party might have lost this presidential election?
I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot say what would happen, but what I can tell you is that I think that the moment there's no more Recep Tayyip Erdogan, that the AKP regime will no longer exist. He is the man who holds everything on his shoulders. I would like also, it's important for me to say one more thing. A lot of wonderful things have been done during the first round of the elections and the second round of the elections, thanks to the Kurds and thanks to the women. The real combat for democracy in this country have been held by women like CHP's Canan Kaftancıoğlu and by Kurds who, despite everything, despite this rising nationalism in this country, despite the fact that they've been ostracized for so long,
they lost their status as kingmaker to the nationalists.
They tried to bring democracy to this country where usually they have been forgotten.
Yeah, the Kurds often sort of considered maybe perhaps the social democrats of Turkey for our international viewers. Ayesha Gül, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your invitation, William.
Independent journalist. We're going to listen to a very popular figure in Turkey, the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, speaking about how important the youth are and how important the opposition's fight is moving forward. Take a listen.
I realize that there are tens of millions of people today who are deeply disappointed. Dear children, don't feel sad. Dear young people, never despair. Ladies, don't be worried. Gentlemen, continue to walk with your heads held high. We are a nation capable of achieving great things in a short space of time. We will do it again.
Well, joining us now is Murat Somer, professor, advisor, CHP party member. Go ahead and step towards me a little bit, Murat. Want to break down these results for you. The opposition took it to a second round, but they were expected to possibly even win outright in the first round. Were you happy with the results of this?
Sure. First of all, I'm not a formal advisor to CHP, but I'm offering my ideas that, mostly in the name of democratization in the country. Yes, it was a surprise. I think the opposition had a fair chance to win. Actually, the polls suggested also that the opposition would, if not win for the second round, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu would lead, actually, the election. So that was a surprise. This is something to be explained. A lot of factors were in play, I think, in my opinion. But of course, personal mistakes play always a role here, external circumstances, but also...
what sort of external circumstances?
Well, people discuss, the candidate choice and, what issues Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu emphasized and, different political parties emphasized, things like that. But the elephant in the room is that in the last decade or so, the Turkish elections have become extremely unfair. The playing field is heavily tilted toward to the advantage of the government. So it is extremely hard for the opposition to really reach the constituency of the governing party. The political strategy of Mr. Erdogan has been, in the last 2 decades, has been to create 2 enormous echo chambers in the country.
The polarization of the country.
This is polarization. This is depolarization. And as far as the opposition is concerned, when the government also uses its media domination, it's an echo chamber surrounded by thick walls, and no matter what it says or no matter how loudly it says, it's not really heard by the...
Let's return to those external factors you had mentioned, questions about Kılıçdaroğlu, if he should stay on as a CHP leader. What do you think? Was he the right candidate?
Well, he might have been the right candidate, but he lost, or he might have been the wrong candidate.
He's very mild-mannered. Turks, there's a lot of analysis that says they want a strong leader. He tried to project that more after round 1. He tried to court the nationalists. Some thought that might have cost them Kurdish support in the southeast. Did that? Yeah.
Well, it's hard that, we shouldn't play too much, into these cultural stereotypes. A mild-mannered leader is also what this country needs because we are so polarized and the politics has become so contentious. We need a more reasonable, rational politics. And often, actually, the opposition is also in between a hard place and a rock and a hard place. If you try to appeal to the nationalist votes, you may lose some Kurdish voters. If you try to appeal to the Kurdish voters, you lose some nationalist voters.
Was the alliance too broad then?
Pardon me?
Was the alliance too broad, the table of 6?
Well, part of the political strategy of the government has been to vilify the opposition. And which means that also two strategies. One is to make all politics about the persona of Mr. Erdogan, who has created a very strong bond with its voters. They have a huge trust in him. And also constantly vilify the opposition. Given that these conditions, it made sense actually for Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu to create a broad alliance so that it will not be just about him or any other candidate, but it will be a referendum between democracy and autocracy. This is actually something that opposition need to do in many other countries as well, from Poland to Hungary to India or Brazil or even to some extent, United States, even though it is a 2-party system. So they did actually the right thing. But it is not easy to do because in the end of the day, these are different political parties, they have different identities, different organizations. It's a very hard, actually, organization. It was a bit slow. It was not very easy to create a common narrative that they could use actually to tell to the voters.
Yeah, there were concerns that maybe voters would be turned off by having such a broad alliance. Concerns about Can you support an alliance that includes nationalists and Islamists, that includes liberals and conservatives? Do you think that might have scared away some voters that were actually wanting change and not wanting Erdogan in power?
Well, if the goal is to rebuild democracy, yes, absolutely you need, right? You know, if you want to rebuild institutions, democracy, then you need a broad consensus. You need the nationalists, you need the Islamists, you need the Kurds, and you need the left and right. So it was the right approach. But it is very difficult to do because you are on one hand saying that we no longer have a normal democracy or even not a democracy, but at the same time you're inviting voters to come and vote. That actually sometimes discourages many voters, so you cannot exactly say that. So they promised actually to build this alliance to bring Turkey back to the path of international standards, full democracy and democratization, actually European style of democratization. But it was hard to communicate to the voters. So a lot of voters still interpreted politics in terms of single political party identities and ideologies. So it was a bit slow. I wouldn't say that actually.
Well, given that, we have local elections coming up in March. As I understand it, the leaders from the Table of Six were meeting last night. We expected an announcement maybe coming out. We didn't hear one. So we think that maybe they're not quite sure if they're going to hold this Table of Six together for that March election, or at least those talks might be ongoing.
Right. So this remains to be seen. But if you ask my opinion, they should. Actually, this cooperation alliance should actually continue. Actually, they should find a way to make the upcoming local elections another referendum on autocracy and democracy, because we will see the results of the policies of the government in the upcoming months. And this will be the chance for them to really take another shot at winning power, winning the hearts and minds of the voters, so that they can bring about some change.
And when you speak about those voters, the youth play a big role in Turkey. In this presidential runoff, we saw two men past retirement age trying to appeal to Generation Z voters. Do you think age also plays a factor in terms of voters' minds?
That's very true. We had a very high number of first-time voters, and this is the Z generation. They have a different outlook. In fact, in the last week of the election, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu did a splendid job in a famous TV show, just with the audience of very young voters. He was able to, I think, create a strong bond with them. But yes, that's one of the challenges actually. But one issue, as far as the rebuilding of democracy in Turkey is concerned, first-time voters have not actually seen any other government than the government of Mr. Erdogan. And part of his strategy has been to really vilify anything before himself, and also the opposition, of course. And it is hard for the oppositions to really to overcome these prejudices, and they have been trying hard. But as I said, in a polarized atmosphere, this is actually quite difficult to do. One of the disconcerting facts about this election has been the use of disinformation very directly by the AKP party. This is very scary for the world democracy, because we have seen that it actually works. You can show a blatant lie with a fake video in a political rally over and over. A significant portion of the electorate will believe in it. And it is very difficult to deny it. Even if you say that, no, I have not said this, or no, I am not doing this, it is very hard to...
If a seed of doubt is planted, it's very difficult to undo.
Absolutely. Doubt is actually even more dangerous than, I think, disbelief, I guess.
Murat, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Murat Samir, professor and CHP party member. Let's look again at those election results. Recep Tayyip Erdogan picking up 52% of the votes. You can see there on your screen the spread of the vote across the country. And if you look to the south of the country, those were the earthquake-ravaged areas of 50,000 dead, 3 million displaced by that quake, and about half of them had trouble registering to vote for this election. Erdogan making the earthquake, as did Kılıçdaroğlu, a major campaign issue about reconstruction efforts. Take a listen.
To those people who were victims of the earthquake, my thoughts and heart are with you, because those people, despite the conditions in their towns and cities, they still turned out to vote. And in 1 year, we will have rebuilt housing for them all.
Joining me now is Sigdem Uzbash from the Yeşil Sol pro-Kurdish Green Party. Thank you so much for being here. First question. It felt like the Kurds, for the longest time in this country, had played the role of kingmakers. This election feels like they were shunned aside, especially after round one. And we saw Erdogan and we saw Kılıçdaroğlu courting the far right, the nationalists and the ultra-nationalists. Is that how you saw it?
We believe that as a third party in the parliament, and with 63 MPs, it was a success in the end of the election, and we are the people who stopped in the first round Erdogan. He couldn't become president because of our votes, not the nationalist or ultra-nationalist votes, but that 5% vote to the second round seemed like key votes, key electorates. When you look at the public opinion, only 2% thinks that the Syrian refugees are the most important issue in their life. But it is a manipulation, really. You can use that percentage to hegemonize and to demoralize the Kurdish vote and push them to the feeling of depression. We managed to keep our voters to go to the second round of presidential vote, and you can see that in 16 cities where the Kurds majority, the Kılıçdaroğlu vote was the majority, and we are on the high level of participation.
On Turkish television last night, we heard some commentators saying that perhaps Kılıçdaroğlu going after the Victory Party's endorsement might have kept some Kurds to refrain from voting, perhaps a lower participation rate in some of those Kurdish provinces. Did you see that?
We have been pushed to be demoralized and to push to boycott, because really Kılıçdaroğlu played into anti-refugee mood and anti-Kurdish sentiment, yeah. And we spoke with our electorates, we spoke with our alignments, and altogether we stopped that demoralization, and we managed to take to the election. And you see from the results of the ballots that we only about 120,000 could go to like the first round, because really our voters are so poor, and they work in other cities, seasonal workers. It is so difficult to take them to the second round again, with all the, even to get buses and everything.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Southern Turkey, much of it devastated by those earthquakes in February. We talked about 3 million people displaced, 50,000 dead. Some of the hardest hit areas were Kurdish areas. In the past, the government has been accused of weaponizing natural disasters against the Kurds. Is that what you see going on now?
When you go around that earthquake area, you see that the earthquake hasn't affected the choice of the electorates, because they were not thinking about the choice of the results of the election. They
thinking
only
more about getting their life back together?
Yeah, their homes, really. And they can only hear the state, yeah? And the government, AKP, is using all the state apparatus and no entry to there as Green Left Party. We didn't have any voice in the all these TV channels, and so much manipulation went to the people that people who defended peace are the terrorists. Green Left Party has been used to manipulate against the sentiments of racism and was the hegemonic issue.
A very polarized country, a third term, 5 more years, entering a third decade in power, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Turkey feels like it's getting more polarized than ever. What do you think this means for the Kurds moving forward?
We believe that we managed to push him back. He was in the danger. The first round he couldn't win. Generally he wins with more majority. This was lower than in the past elections. And this is one. The other one is authoritarianism and the democracy. We put these choices on the agenda, and our base were in favor of democracy against one-man state authoritarianism, and Kurds were really consistent on democracy and the peace, really. And all others, even the Kılıçdaroğlu, used the anti-refugee sentiment, anti-Kurdish mood in the second round. I believe that they were not consistent, and that strengthens racism and the anger, hatred against LGBT.
LGBT community, a step in the right direction, but the fight isn't over. Çiğdem, so much. Thank you for your time. Çiğdem Uzbaş from the Yeşil Sol Pro-Kurdish Green Party. That brings us to the end of this special debate from Istanbul. Thank you for watching, and please stay tuned to France 24.